Thanks, Howard. Okay, so we're going to take a short quiz this morning. We've done this before. I'm going to give you a clue. It is an American history quiz, so all you teenagers, they should know this. But if not, adults, I think we can help them. So just going to kind of describe somebody. I want you to try to tell me who this is. This person was a brilliant farmer, statesman, warrior. He led in battle with a cunning determination and incredible courage. He had every right to think of himself more highly than he did, but on many occasions, he refused the honor that the people wanted to bestow upon him. And he led us through some of the most trying times our country has ever known. Who is this? So I heard it. George Washington, right? All right. So somebody said Lincoln. All right. He wasn't really a warrior, and I don't think he was a farmer, but okay. 1 for the adults, 0 for the kids. Okay, let's try this one. Ready? A handsome, brilliant speaker. He displayed heroic actions as a soldier and fighter. He led during significant historical times and displayed calm during a showdown that could have destroyed a fragile peace. He had famous and not so famous relationships with multiple women, even though he was married. John F. Kennedy, yeah. There was actually a couple you could have chose that might have been close. But it's John F. Kennedy, right? Here's the point. Both of those men led our country through some incredible times. The American Revolution perhaps was unwinnable, and yet George was able to rally the troops. And it's funny that this country was founded on people who were rejecting a king, but as soon as they saw a leader who was stalwart and had courage and determination and overcome great odds, what did they want to do? The American people wanted to make him king. And he said, no thanks. John F. Kennedy, man, the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, that was some incredibly tense times in our nation's history. I mean, we were on the brink of a third world war. And he led us really well, but because of his extracurricular activities and because of his morality, he has quite a different reputation, right? 2 famous leaders, 2 vastly different reputations. It's perhaps even JFK, the 50th anniversary was this past week of his assassination, and perhaps those relationships were even broader than the people wanted to know and wanted to believe. Reputation is important, and it's a unique contrast there to see what that looks like. So I got a question for you. What is your reputation? What are you known for? So think about this. Reputation, here's the definition of it, is the beliefs or opinions that are generally held about someone or something. So that could be an individual or an organization. It's a belief or opinion that someone has or holds about you. It's a belief or opinion that someone holds about us as a church. And so before we really jump into this, I want to say something. Your reputation, or what people believe, or the opinions they hold about you or hold about us as a church, is important and not at the same time. That's interesting, isn't it? How you stand with God and how He perceives you is paramount. But there are too many instructions and examples in God's Word that talk about a good name and a good reputation to ignore the significance that a good reputation should play in our walk as Christ followers. So let's look at how this is illustrated in the Word this morning. We're going to look at 3 different men with 3 very different reputations. Go to Daniel chapter 4. Daniel chapter 4. So 2 weeks ago, we were introduced to this character named Nebuchadnezzar. And he's the king who erected a statue of himself and expected the people to bow. And when the 3 Israelites, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, didn't, remember, he heated the furnace up 7 times hotter than before, and he throws them in there, and only to see them partying in there with God himself. Daniel chapter 4 is going to tell us a little bit more about this Nebuchadnezzar and his reputation. Daniel 4:18. King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he calls all his leaders together and doesn't know what it is. And this is where we pick up the story, 4:18. Belteshazzar, that was a dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now tell me what it means, for none of the wise men in my kingdom can do so. But you can tell me, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you." Upon hearing this, Daniel, also known as Belteshazzar, was overcome for a time, frightened by the meaning of the dream. Then the king said to him, "Don't be alarmed by the dream and what it means." Daniel replied, "I wish the events foreshadowed in this dream would happen to your enemies, my lord, and not to you." Verse 20. "The tree you saw was growing very tall and strong, reaching high into the heavens for all the world to see. It had fresh green leaves and was loaded with fruit for all to eat. Wild animals lived in its shades and birds nest in its branches. That tree, your majesty, is you. For you have grown strong and great. Your greatness reaches up to heaven, and you rule to the ends of the earth." 27. "King Nebuchadnezzar, please accept my advice. Stop sinning and do what is right. Break from your wicked past and be merciful to the poor. Perhaps then you will continue to prosper." And flip over to chapter 5, verse 18. Again, this is about King Nebuchadnezzar. "Your majesty, the Most High God, gave sovereignty, majesty, glory, and honor to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. He made him so great that people of all races and nations and language trembled before him in fear. He killed those he wanted to kill and spared those he wanted to spare. He honored those he wanted to honor and disgraced those he wanted to disgrace. But when his heart and mind were puffed up with arrogance, he was brought down from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven from human society. He was given the mind of a wild animal, and he lived among the wild donkeys. He ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he learned the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them." King Nebuchadnezzar had a reputation. From the earliest account we have of him, he was a guy that liked to make decrees. He built a statue about himself, and he liked to make laws that made himself look better. He was indeed a shrewd, strong leader. I don't know if you caught that there in 5, but it said all the nations bowed before him. This was the superpower of that day. And he had all the wealth and riches and armies and things that society and status thought were important. But he was proud, and he didn't acknowledge God as God. He had a mixed reputation, wouldn't you say? He was feared by everyone, accumulated that power, but he was rejected by God. What good did it do him? Well, he spent 7 years wandering the plains, eating grass like cattle, and he was out of his mind until he acknowledged the Lord. This is important. His reputation is important because it has implications on one of our next reputation that we're going to look at. What we do now has implications on down the road that sometimes we don't even see or we don't even know. The point about his reputation is at some points, Nebuchadnezzar honored God and he acknowledged him. But there were more times that he was proud about himself. The next reputation I want us to look at is Belshazzar. Look at chapter 5, verse 1. This is King Nebuchadnezzar's son. And what's interesting about that is he had the privilege of watching what leading well and not leading well look like. His example should have been a warning for him how to lead and a beacon for how to lead and not lead. Instead, we see him following the worst of his dad and forgetting the best. Look at 5, verse 1. Many years later, King Belshazzar gave a feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver cups that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. He wanted to drink from them with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. So they brought these gold cups taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. While they drank from them, they praised their idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So what do we know about him? What do we know about his reputation? He ignored what should have been a stark reminder of his dad's greatness and his dad's failures, but he just ignored it. He didn't pay attention. He had the benefit of history and turned a blind eye. He should have known how important it was to know what God thought about him, but he acted completely above it. Can you imagine throwing a party for 1,000 people, 1,000 nobles and their wives and girlfriends, and they brought in the best wine, and then they went and got the religious symbols from the people that they held captive to rub it in their face. He completely acted above God and ignored God. And it said they were loving the idols that they had made, completely turning a blind eye to who God was. We know that he valued his friends and the important people, so he had them come to a party. We know that he had morality issues as well, because he was trying to impress not only his friends, but his wives and his girlfriends. So what happens? Look at verse 5, Daniel 5:5. Suddenly they saw the fingers of a human hand writing on the plaster wall of the king's palace near the lampstand. The king himself saw the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale with fright. His knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him. The king shouted for his enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers to be brought before him. He said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever can read this writing and tell me what it means will be dressed in purple robes of royal honor and will have a gold chain placed around his neck. He will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Verse 8, but when all the king's wise men had come in, none of them could read the writing or tell him what it meant. So the king grew even more alarmed, and his face turned pale. His nobles, too, were shaken. So they can't figure out what's going on, and it's troubling him. Skip down to verse 23. For you have proudly defied the Lord of heaven, and have had these cups from his temple brought before you. You and your nobles and your wives and concubines have been drinking from wine with them while praising gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, gods that neither see nor hear nor know anything at all. But you have not honored the God who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny. So God has sent this hand to write this message. This is a message that was written many, many tekel and parsin. This is what these words mean. Many means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the balances and not measured up. Parsin means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was dressed in purple robes, and gold chains were hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed. Think about it. There were 1,000 people at this party. He was well liked. He's spreading the wealth around in his affluence, but he did not honor God. His reputation, and hear this, was good in all the wrong places. The people loved him. Why not? He's throwing a party, and he's invited them to come. People, nobles, wives, girlfriends. But one thing was missing. God saw him and found him wanting. The end was not good for him. So those are two men, two kings, two leaders, two distinct reputations, both of which were known throughout the land, but for the wrong reasons and by the wrong people. Look at the third person in our story, Daniel, and this brings us to our question of the day. Chapter 5, verse 13. So Daniel was brought in before the king. The king asked him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles brought from Judah by my father, King Nebuchadnezzar? I have heard that you have the spirit of the gods within you, and that you are filled with insight, understanding, and wisdom." Wow, what a reputation. We're introduced to Daniel in the very first chapter of Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar conquers the Jewish people, the Israelites, and takes the best and brightest of the men and brings them back to him, to Babylon in captivity, and wants to train them in their ways. Because you see, he feels like if he can break their culture, he can break their country and make them like him. Very shrewd. And he begins to feed all these captives with food, and Daniel realizes, one, it didn't honor God. It wasn't the food they were supposed to eat as Jewish children. And two, he knew their body would reject it. It was a diet that wasn't for them. And so he shrewdly talks to this guard and bargains with him and says, "Test us and see if this doesn't work." What a wise person. So we're introduced right away to know that he's smart, he's brave, he's a leader. And what happened? They were shown to be the smartest and most intelligent, he and his three friends. And then the next chapter, we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing up. We don't know where Daniel is at that time, but the very next chapter, we find him telling the king, Nebuchadnezzar, what his dream means. Belshazzar inherits the kingdom from his dad, turns his back on God, and all of a sudden, at the moment that he's needed the most, Belshazzar's wife says, there's a guy that told your dad what he dreamed. He has the Spirit of God living in him, is what she said. What a reputation. Smart, shrewd, courage, leader. More importantly, someone known as the Spirit of God living in him. So he interprets the dream for King Nebuchadnezzar and gives credit to God. Remember when Nebuchadnezzar asked him to interpret his dream, he said, "Oh, king, there's no one that can. You're all your smart people, they can't, and I can't. But God can. And I'll go to my God." And he went back to his friends and said, "Let's pray that God would give me wisdom and insight." And God did. What a reputation. So he's a person of faith in God, and it showed. Each step of the way, Daniel adds to his reputation at just the right time. He was remembered by Belshazzar's wife for what he had done. He was remembered for his deeds and his wisdom, and he was remembered for being a man of God. So here's some things we can learn. A reputation is built over time. Daniel started strong and continued on. A reputation comes with building blocks along the way. Secondly, people are quicker to talk about people with a bad reputation, but good will eventually stand out. As the king's wife displayed regarding Daniel, she had heard about him and remembered him when the time was right. But isn't it interesting that the National Enquirer and all the gossip magazines, they don't tell us about the good about people. They tell us the bad, right? We like to hear about bad reputation. There's something there. But good reputations went out. As with many things, a reputation is built over time, but can be destroyed in 1 minute. A reputation, a church reputation, takes a long time to build, but can be brought down in 1 minute. An individual reputation takes a long time to build, but can be brought down by one bad decision. You think you can get away with things? We think we can get away with things, but God knows, and what He thinks about us is paramount. A good reputation, fourthly, a good reputation makes it easier to obtain jobs and favor on jobs. A spouse and virtually every personal relationship is strengthened when we have a good reputation. So here's some verses to think about. Proverbs 22:1. Listen to this. Choose a good reputation over great riches. Being held in high esteem is better than silver or gold. Want to be held in high esteem? Demonstrate by your actions and not your words. Talk's cheap. People want to know what you believe by how you behave. People want to know what you believe by the deeds that you do. And notice that word, choose a good reputation. It's a choice that requires hard work and consistency. Listen to the words of Job, and this will give us an idea of what it means to have a good reputation. Job in chapter 29 says, "When I walked downtown and sat with my friends in the public square, young and old greeted me with respect. I was honored by everyone in town. When I spoke, everyone listened. They hung on my every word. People who knew me spoke well of me. My reputation went ahead of me. I was known for helping people in trouble and standing up for those who were down on their luck. The dying blessed me, and the bereaved were cheered by my visits. All my dealings with people were good. I was known for being fair to everyone I met. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame, father to the needy, and champion of the abused aliens. I grabbed street thieves by the scuff of the neck and made them give back what they had stolen." Want to have a good reputation? There's a good example. Listen to what he did. He treated the old and young well. It's easy to treat our peers well, right? It's very difficult to treat the old and the young well. It's very difficult to exhibit respect across generational lines. And yet that's God's plan. We like to ignore the other generations, poke fun out of them, or blame them. Treat young and old well. Secondly, speak well and not coarsely like we are instructed to avoid. There's countless scriptures that say, watch your tongue, watch your speech. How many Christians have been submarined in their reputation because they talk well on Sunday and talk coarse on Monday? I share the story of the guy who greets at my church in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Our greeter, one of the nicest men I've ever met. His wife was perhaps the godliest lady I'd ever met. And I knew Buddy to be this stalwart Christian, and I went to the golf course one day, and Buddy was a marshal. And I heard a man speak that I didn't recognize. He talked differently. He didn't talk like a salty Christian who wanted to spread God's love and hope. He talked like the coarse sailor that he'd once been 50 years ago. What a shame. Thirdly, look what Job did. It said he visited the sick, the down and the out. He was eyes to the blind, feet to the lame. He visited the sick. He cared for people. He had hospitality just oozing out of him. And he was a wealthy man. He treated people fairly and with consistency. And he was about justice for the evil and justice for the abused. You want a good reputation? There's a great example. The question for Daniel was essentially, are you the Daniel that blessed my father? Are you the Daniel that had a great reputation? So I have a question for you. Are you a man, woman of God? Are you a person who is respected by all? Are you a person who works to build a great reputation? And through your entire Christian faith, you have done everything you can to have building blocks of success so you can look back and say, I have a good name. I chose a good name. It's very hard work. It's very hard work, but it's worth it. So perhaps you're here today and you have, through your life's choices, tarnished your reputation. You found yourself in a situation and you made the wrong choice and you beat yourself up about your reputation. Samson traded his reputation in the scriptures for a few minutes of pleasure. And it took him a long time to recover it. But when you look at the heroes of faith that are listed in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, guess whose name you'll find among them? Samson. So even though he traded his name for a moment of pleasure, God allowed him to be restored in the end when he brought down the temple. And some of you are here today and you traded that, which was one of your greatest treasures, your name, your reputation. And God says, I want to restore it. I want to help you rebuild it. He doesn't expect perfection, but he wants our pursuit. He wants our passion. And we can regain what was lost through him. Because remember what I said at the start, your reputation is important, and it's not at the same time. What's important is that when you're put in God's balance, he finds you good and right, not wanting like King Belshazzar. Perhaps you are here and it seems you're a magnet for conflict and discord. Do you realize what your reputation actually is? Perhaps you're a leader and there's always an undercurrent of conflict around you. Blind spots are really only blind to us, to you. There's enough conflict in most church bodies, this one included. Most people aren't even aware of what kind of reputation they have when that occurs. And it's time to probably gently talk with one another when we see a reputation that is following someone that can't see it. So my words to you this morning are to build your reputation well. Follow the example of Job. Gently help people see themselves for who they are. For you see, the Bible says we're to bear one another's burdens. We're to confess our faults one to another. We don't do that very well. But if we want to have the reputation in the community as a vibrant, life-giving church, part of that vibrancy is confrontation. healthy, loving, gentle confrontation. So if someone like Buddy is walking around in our midst, rather than accepting it for what it is, why don't we say, "Here, let me come alongside you and help you have a reputation that lasts." So wherever you find yourself today, are you Daniel? Is a great question for all of us. Let's stand and pray. I would ask you, because we do these things called invitations, perhaps your reputation needs a little repair work. Well, we have an invitation, use it. Go across the aisle, come down to the altar, find someone that you need to work with to try to make that better. Perhaps that's you. Perhaps you know someone that needs our prayer in this area. Lift them up during our time of invitation. But you respond how God has spoken to you. Father, we're grateful for today. Father,